Hi everyone, Michael E. Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology with part 2 of our deep dive into some of the charts that surrounded the final moments of Charlie Kirk's life. So today we're going to be taking a look at the event chart of the moment of Charlie Kirk's assassination. And use that chart as a means of understanding some of the things and some of the elements that were present at the time of that event, and to also see if we can see other hidden astrological factors that can shed light onto what occurred. And I think that this entire procedure is very important because it gives us the ability to find greater context. And while in a year's time, we may not need to find context regarding this event in particular, I think it gives us the ability to find context within the events that occur within our lives in general. So the studying of events is something that I think we all should be able to do. So without further ado, we're going to dive into the chart. Just so you all know, my delineations have specifically been coming from my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, Pathways Towards the Cosmos Indwelling, because the back of this book, as far as I'm concerned, is truly the best thing since sliced bread. Because in the back of this book, I go into all of the planetary combinations and how those combinations manifest not only psychologically within our minds and sociologically within our lives, but also physiologically within our bodies. And this is on page 633 of the New Western Medical Astrology, Planetary Pairings in Medical Astrology. It's over 600 pages of medical astrology. But if I had to buy this book for only one part of this book, this last portion, which for all intents and purposes is the thinnest portion of this book, this last 20 or so pages makes buying the entire book worthwhile. So if you have not gotten yourself a copy of the New Western Medical Astrology, I highly recommend you do so, because not only is this the book where I'm going to be deriving my delineations from today, but this is also a book that gives us the ability to start interacting with our astrology from more of a planetary perspective and not just a science of the zodiac perspective, which I definitely think is the wavelength of the future. Now, let's dive into the charts and see what they say. So here we have on my screen the chart for Charlie Kirk's assassination, and this occurred on September 10th, 2025, which was a Wednesday at 12:20 p.m. in Orem, Utah. And the ascendant of this event was 20 degrees Scorpio, 2 minutes. Now, event astrology is an offspring of horary astrology in a very real way. So in looking at this chart, we're going to be looking at this chart as if this were a horary chart and interpreting it as such as well. And to that end, we're going to be taking a look at the ruler of the ascendant as giving us a context for the backdrop and the background of the event in general. And we're going to be taking a look at the moon as well, because the moon is the psychic undercurrent for everything that occurs within our lives. So let's go and take a look at those two things as a point of beginning. So first up, we have the ascendant at 20 degrees Scorpio, 2 minutes. In general, we know that Scorpio tends to get a bad rep because the ancients thought that Scorpio corresponded with the middle of the autumn, because that is when they thought the poison of the scorpion extended in a subterraneous fashion across the land, causing things to die even while they still stood. So the ancients observed that in the world around them, they saw the trees dying in the autumn. They saw the grass turning brown in the autumn. They saw the world around them dying. They associated the period of time that we associate with Scorpio as being a period of time that we associate with death in general. because they thought that there was a fundamental poison that spread everywhere during moments when we had the sun ingressing in Scorpio and during the 30-day period that the sun was in Scorpio. So there's a very real association with Scorpio and this thought of the initiation of the death process. And by extension of that, we're reminded that within the Kabbalistic Tarot, the sign of the zodiac Scorpio is associated with the tarot card death. And the esoteric name of the death card in the Kabbalistic Tarot is Child of the Great Transformers, Lord of the Gates of Death. So here within this chart, we see the Child of the Great Transformers, the Lord of the Gates of Death, rising on the cusp of the Ascendant at this moment when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And within my book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, which is the second book within our Oracular's Complete Astrology series, I speak about what I call omenology. Omenology for me is a style of astrology that isn't just based on the technical things that we know to look for when we look at a birth chart. When I refer to omenology, I'm essentially referring to this larger idea of simply looking at the omens that are present within the chart and using those omens as a means of informing me as to what is going on within the chart in general. And so this idea of omenology says that there are some omens that are just worthy of our consideration from an astrological perspective. For example, within this chart, we see Scorpio rising, and that can be thought of as an omen of death based on everything else that I said previously. Another thing that's significant about this chart is what is known as the Dwadashamsa, or the better said as the Dwadashamsha. And the Dwadashamsha, or the Dwad, is what we refer to as the 12th part. And the 12th part of the Ascendant, according to ancient medieval astrologers, oftentimes pointed us in the direction of what the chart was actually meant to be saying to us. While this isn't something that we can see on the screen as it is, if you're using Solar Fire, and you were to go over to chart, and then you were to go down to the Vedic option, you would see that it more than likely already has this Vedic D12 Dwadashamsha chart already highlighted. When you click OK, it gives you the option as to whether or not you want to create the standard Vedic natal chart, or whether or not you want to use the non-standard zodiac type, which in our case is going to be the tropical zodiac. So I'm going to click no. And when we do that, we see that it gives us the D12 chart. And this D12 chart shows us what was the Dwad that was rising at the moment of Charlie Kirk's assassination. And the Dwad was located in 0 degrees of Cancer, 26 minutes. Now, what I have to do is go back to the Charlie Kirk assassination chart and see where does 0 degrees Cancer, 26 minutes land within Charlie Kirk's assassination chart. And when we look at this chart, we see that 0 degrees Cancer, 36 minutes is landing here squarely in the 8th house. And as a result of that, we can say that the Dwad of this chart is located within the 8th house, and that the Dwad of this chart is also pointing us in the direction of the Charlie Kirk assassination chart to the 8th house as being the actual reason why we're here having this discussion in any event. What we find within the 8th house is that the 8th house is symbolically the house of death from a traditional astrological perspective, which is a very important thing for us to consider because this is the moment when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And at the exact moment of his assassination, not only does he have the sign that is metaphysically associated with the poison and the toxicity of the death process, but he also has 20 degrees Scorpio rising, which is corresponding with the dwad that is located within 0 degrees Cancer. And 0 degrees Cancer within this chart is located within the 8th house, which is once again the house of death. The ancients refer to the 8th house as epikataphora. Epikataphora is ancient Greek for falling into hell. The opposite of the 8th house, the 2nd house, is known as anaphora. Anaphora, which is ancient Greek for exiting out of hell. So the ancients thought that the 8th house was where a person fell headfirst into the gates of hell, into the gates of Hades, which the ancients also referred to as the gates of Pluto. Now, the reason why I don't call it the gates of Pluto in the 21st century is because I think that in the 21st century, there's enough modern astrology that's already occurring where people already associate the 8th house with Pluto as an extension of them associating the 8th house with Scorpio. And that's not something that I like to feed into. However, within ancient astrology, the 8th house was referred to as the abode of Pluto, not in the same sense as we think of it in modern astrology. So please don't leave this broadcast saying that Michael Bryan said that Pluto is associated with the 8th house, because I'm not referring to the astrological Pluto. I'm referring to Pluto as a god of death. And so the ancients tell us that the 8th house is the house of Pluto or the gates of Pluto. And by extension, it is the entry point into the realms of the underworld. So as we sit down to assess this Charlie Kirk assassination chart, we've already discovered that 1, the child of the great transformers, the lord of the gates of death, is rising on the cusp of the ascendant. 2, the specific degree of Scorpio that is rising on the cusp of the ascendant corresponds with the 8th house of this same chart through the use of the D12 or the Dwad or the Dwadashamsha. And in ancient Greek, this Dwad concept was referred to as the Dodecatomoria. And Dodecatomoria similarly means 12th part or 12th division. And so the Dwad or the Dodecatomoria of the ascendant is oftentimes used within horary astrology as a means of finding out what is truly moving within the heart of the person. What is the real reason why we're here sitting down having this conversation at this moment? We are here sitting down having this conversation because we are here speaking specifically about death. And the 12th part, or the Dwad, or the Dodecatomoria of the ascendant, has specifically pointed us to the 8th house as the starting point of this conversation. Now, as we move beyond assessing the ascendant as a singular factor, and we move more deeply into assessing some of the combinations that we find within the chart, the very next thing that we would do from a traditional astrology perspective is we would take a look at the ruler of the ascendant. So we have completed our omenology part of our deep dive into Charlie Kirk's assassination chart. And now we're going to the technical part, which is the actual interpretation of the chart from a tactical perspective. And here we have Mars at 22 degrees of Libra, 18 minutes. We have Mars essentially debilitated because this is Mars in the sign of his detriment at 22 degrees Libra, 18 minutes. And so that's already telling us that the energetic backdrop of this moment is also a backdrop that we associate with something being in its detriment. When the planet is in its detriment, that is as if that planet is in a state of active destruction. And this idea of active destruction comes directly to us courtesy of Merriam-Webster. And the reason why I reference Merriam-Webster in this sort of delineation is because I think it's very important for us to understand the meaning of words as a means of us also understanding how those words are relevant within our wider astrological practice. So here we have Mars in its detriment, which means that this Mars not only isn't in a position to do anything good within this particular chart, this Mars also isn't in a place to do anything at all within this particular chart, because Mars is, as far as Mars is concerned, in the opposite set of circumstances than are circumstances that would make that Mars feel comfortable. When a planet is in its detriment, it has gone as far away from its home as possible, to the point where it knows and it realizes within itself, we really shouldn't be here right now. There's something going on under the surface of what we can see that is really making me feel deep within my guts that this environment that I find myself in is absolutely wrong for me. It is absolutely foreign for me. This is not where I'm supposed to be. Now, while some planets can be in their detriment and be sad about it, when we have the malefics within their detriment, it creates an even more detrimental effect and an even more damaging effect, because the nature of the malefics is to cause evil in any event. So having Mars in its detriment, representing the overarching energy of this exact moment and being the Lord of the overarching energy of this exact moment, is saying to us that at this moment we have a Mars who is angry, who is violent, who is volatile, who is ready to take blood, because this Mars is uncomfortable in ways that are causing this Mars to feel cornered and like a trapped animal, and like it needs to do something extreme in order to give itself an exit point of liberation. And so I'm not using this as a means of speaking about Charlie and how he felt at this moment, and neither am I using this to speak about the shifter or his internal processes at the moment. I'm using this to speak about what is the psychic backdrop that was present within the air at this exact moment when this event occurred. And the psychic backdrop that was present within the air at this exact moment that this event occurred was that of a ravenous animal, that of a cornered or a caged animal, that of a beast that was pushed into a corner and as a result of that was lashing out. Not a docile beast that can be pushed in a corner and it cower there, but a mighty lion, as the Bible describes the devil and says that the devil is like a mighty lion seeking whom he may devour. This is the sort of Mars that represents that mighty lion seeking whom he may devour. And this is essentially an hour of devouring, an hour of destruction. We see this further exemplified by the fact that this isn't just Mars ruling the ascendant, but we also have Mars being the specific ruler of the hour. Which means that at the exact moments that that trigger was pulled, we were operating within an hour of war, as well as rumors of war. And as I look at this, I see that not only is this an hour of wars and rumors of war, but this was the very last few moments within that hour. We could even describe it as being the anaretic degree of that hour, because the next hour, the hour of the sun, would have started essentially 1 minute later. So here we're seeing this idea or this sense of a final moment, of a finality, as it were, because we were in the very last seconds of the hour of Mars. If we go to the Charlie Kirk assassination chart and we animate this, and then we step this forward by a matter of minutes, we see that literally in 1 minute, we are told that this assassination happened at 12:20 p.m. In 1 minute of that event, we switch from it being the hour of Mars to it being the hour of the sun. So we were, as it were, at the last gasp, at the final moment, at the anaretic degree, if we could use that term. We were at the anaretic degree of the hour of Mars. This degree, which essentially is a degree of the utmost crisis, of the utmost fear, of the utmost trepidation, of the utmost destruction, essentially. We were at the final moment, the destruction of the hour of Mars, at the moment when the trigger was pulled. So I think that these things are serving, once again, not necessarily to describe anybody in the event, but simply to describe some of the energetic backdrop that we have going on. From the Scorpio rising, 20 degrees Scorpio rising, which from the perspective of the Kabbalistic tarot is called the child of the great transformers, the lord of the gates of death, to the Dada Katamoria, or the D12, being present here within the 8th house, which is once again the house of the entry point into the gates of the underworld, or the entry point into the gates of hell, therefore making this the house of death. So secretly, within the spiritual structure and the spiritual skeleton of this chart, we technically have the house of death rising. 2, us not only having Mars in a ravenous and wrathful state, being the god that is ruling this ascendant, to us also being in the hour of Mars, meaning that this is an hour of bloodshed. This is an hour of fires. This is an hour of catastrophe and calamity and chaos. This is an hour of pain and panic. This is an hour of destruction. To us now also realizing that this also happened in the anaretic degree of that hour. The very final minute of that hour is when that trigger was pulled. All of these things coming together seems to corroborate for us this idea that this indeed was a critical moment. Now, if we move on from this, as we should, and take a look at the moon within this chart. And before we go on to the moon within this chart, there's another thing that I think is noteworthy. And I didn't want to mention it the first time around when we initially did this recording, because I felt as if it was a pretty stupid sort of thing, and I didn't want to breathe life into the stupidity. Because on this day of Charlie Kirk's assassination, we do see that he has the Mars in the conjunction with his natal sun. And I didn't want to talk about that because all of us end up having Mars in the conjunction with our sun, Mars in the trine with Mars in the square with our sun, Mars in the sesqui square with our sun, Mars in the semi-square with our sun, Mars in the opposition with our sun. We all have Mars doing something to our sun by hard aspect within any given year. So I didn't want to breathe life into this thought that, oh, on this day, it's as a result of him having Mars conjunct to the sun that this act of violence happened against him. However, now that we've gone through this process of taking a look at this chart, of taking a look at the assassination chart, and we see the importance of this Mars, and we see the overwhelming level of importance of this Mars. Not only do we have Mars being the ruler of the ascendant, but we also have Mars being the ruler of the hour. This conjunction between Mars and Charlie Kirk's sun seems that much more vital and that much more critical and that much more worthy of our consideration. So this is one of the factors that we see present just from the perspective of his natal chart. Now we're going to go on and talk about the moon within this chart, because the moon is most definitely the psychic undercurrent of everything that occurs within our lives. And she is also the psychic undercurrent of every horary chart that we might hope to cast. And here we see the moon at 28 degrees of Aries, 57 minutes in the 6th house. Now, the moon in Aries is not in her essential dignities at all, because she's in the domicile of Mars. She's in the exaltation of the sun. In this daytime chart, she is in the triplicity of the sun. She's in the term of Saturn. And she's also in the face of Venus. So this moon at 28 degrees of Aries is absolutely positively peregrine. And when a planet is peregrine, it's as if that planet has no sense of direction or a center of gravity there is a sense of the planet being completely lost and confused and not knowing where to go or how to go or where to be or who to be, because there is no sense of civility, no sense of being able to see a town in the distance. It's as if this person is thrown in the middle of nowhere and has absolutely no ability to function while in that space. And so here we see this moon, a very chaotic moon, being the psychic undercurrent of this moment. The moon was peregrine. The moon was lost and confused. The wires in the air were lost and confused. There was a sense of fundamental not knowing where we were, and the sense of energetically not knowing where we were, not knowing what was going on under the auspices of this particular moon. But the very last thing that occurred on this day before this moon became void of course, meaning that she was making no more aspects on this day. Her final aspect was her opposition to Mars. The same Mars who we've already said is the Lord of the Ascendant of this moment. The same Mars who we also said was the Lord of the hour of this moment. That same Mars was the Mars that fundamentally represented the final point of connection that the moon made on this day. Now, when we take a look at this within the context of my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, what we see is that Moon Mars as a combination. I spoke a lot about people's mothers in this book because I thought that that was a very important thing for us to do. But I said Moon Mars denotes a fiery mother. The native's mother may have been angry, aggressive, and extremely independent. Now, within the mundane astrology perspective, we're not speaking about anybody's mother, but within the mundane astrology perspective, the moon is denoting the hour of an event. Therefore, we could very well read this as the moon Mars denotes a fiery hour. The hour at which this event took place was the fiery hour. The hour may have been angry, aggressive, and extremely independent. So all of these factors are what we can use to describe the exact hour at which this event transpired. I also said that within the charts of men, this combination can suggest that the native's mother, sister, and other female family members represent power and intimidation within the native's life. This may have had the effect of emasculating the native as a young boy. Now, beyond that specifically, once again, transforming all of these women into the hour of the event, we can say that within the chart of the day, this combination can suggest that the hour represents an hour of power and intimidation within the world at large. And this is most definitely what we might consider to have been the case on this day. Now, Moon Mars is also a combination that has to do with bleeding, because Mars has to do with bleeding and the moon has to do with the fluid within the body in general. And so what I've written down here is that Moon Mars additionally has been found in cases of heavy bleeding during menstruation and excessive pain during menstruation. Dorotheus wrote that when a woman has the moon afflicted by Mars, it can signify that she has to carve the baby out of the womb. This combination can also signify miscarriages, especially if there are multiple factors within the chart that corroborate this delineation. Now, once again, we're not talking about anybody's specific chart in general, but we are talking about the moon Mars having to do with a sense of violence in general, because Mars denotes violence, and the moon within a mundane astrological chart has to do with the people. So, moon Mars within mundane astrology can represent an hour of violence against the people, or an hour where there is massive violence occurring within the world at large. And so that's what we find here within this combination of the moon Mars. Now we see that the moon is also here present within the sixth house. And so that means that this could be a very stressful moment. Traditionally, we speak about the sixth house as a house of slavery, but in the 21st century, I view the sixth house as a house of stress. So the moon, already peregrine as she is representing a sense of anxiety, and a potent internal nervousness. And she's also present within the house of stress. So we have an anxious, nervous, stressed out moon presiding over the hour of this event. Now, if we were to take this even further, we note that the moon is in an albeit wide square, but a square nonetheless with Pluto. And moon square Pluto, if the moon once again is representing the word hour for us from a mundane astrological perspective, Pluto could represent trauma. So moon Pluto could signify an hour of trauma. Similarly, within the mundane astrological perspective, if the moon is representing the people and Pluto is representing trauma, then moon Pluto can denote a traumatized people at this moment. When we go over towards my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, and see what I wrote there about moon Pluto as a combination, what we see is that the native may harbor great pain surrounding the story of their mother. We could change that because we're not talking about somebody's personal birth chart. We're talking about the chart of a moment. And we can change that and say the people at this moment may harbor a great amount of pain surrounding the story of this hour. She may have been a powerful woman who was also cruel, harsh, and manipulative. The hour may have been a truly powerful hour indeed, which may have been a cruel hour within the world at large, a harsh hour within the world at large, and a manipulative hour within the world at large. Physiologically, this combination of moon Pluto often corresponds with gut trauma, particularly as it relates to the elimination of waste. This combination can correspond with trauma at this hour in general, particularly surrounding the topic of elimination. Now, fine, I am adapting what I wrote here specifically as a means of making it more relevant to the story of this moment, but it doesn't matter the adaptation. The point is that we have a limited symbolic framework within astrology by which to describe everything that occurs within our world, and it is our duty to be able to read a delineation. And if that delineation does not apply, because we're not talking about somebody's guts and we're not talking about somebody's mom, we need to use the appropriate languaging that does actually define the event in the way that that event should be defined. Once again, I'm receiving and I'm drawing these delineations from the New Western Medical Astrology, which is my latest book on medical astrology, but you can also use this as a means of understanding other branches of astrology that even go beyond our physiological constitution specifically. So that's the combination of moon Pluto and what moon Pluto is denoting within this chart. Now, I know that I have a number of students who are probably quite aware that in this chart as well, we also have the combination of the moon Chiron. Moon Chiron is not something I would ever speak about within a traditional horary astrology context. And the reason why I wouldn't speak about it in horary astrology is because I don't believe that any asteroid has any relevance or any place within horary astrology. However, I will tell you what Moon Chiron means to me. And I'll also tell you what Mars Chiron means to me, because I don't think I wrote about Mars Chiron in my book, The New Western Medical Astrology. And there's a reason for that. I didn't want to write about Mars Chiron in the book. I didn't really want to use my medical astrology book as a means of overly talking about Chiron, because I only overly talk about the things that I know and that I feel at least 90% confident that what I'm going to say about those things is how those things manifest 9 times out of 10, basically. And while I do have some anecdotal thoughts about Mars Chiron, I don't feel as strongly about them as I do, for example, about Moon Chiron, or as I do, for example, about Venus Chiron, or as I do, for example, about Mercury Chiron, or as I do, for example, about Saturn Chiron, or even Sun Chiron. I have garnered and have amassed a body of thoughts that are accurate at least 9 times out of 10 in relationship with Chiron and certain planetary factors, particularly the moon Chiron, because the moon Chiron is what started me on this whole Chiron journey, if one could call it that. But I don't feel as strongly about the Mars Chiron. However, I will tell you that Mars is representing wounds and bloodshed, and Chiron, if you rearrange the letters in Chiron, you get the word chronic. Chronic, chronic. It's probably missing a C. But the point is, you can rearrange the letters in the word Chiron to get the word chronic. And I think that that is quite significant because Chiron oftentimes, and by oftentimes I mean all the times, will manifest as a wound that cannot heal. And on this day, we have the combination of Mars, Chiron, and we also have the moon there as well. So some of you might look at that and say, well, hey, Michael, don't be an idiot. The Mars Chiron is a little bit far because we have the Chiron at 26 degrees, we have the Mars at 22 degrees. But the moon is doing for the Mars and Chiron what they can't do for each other, because the moon is both an aspect with the Mars as well as having a corporal or physical conjunction with the Chiron. Therefore, the moon within herself is bringing together the influences of these two factors. So if Mars is representing wounding and bloodshed, and Chiron is representing a wound that cannot heal, will never heal, and is going to stay with you for life, then Mars Chiron is going to represent bloodshed that cannot be stymied, a wound that cannot be treated, and a fatality, essentially, that cannot be altered, is what we can derive from the combination of Mars Chiron. Now, moon Chiron, which once again, as far as I'm concerned, isn't necessarily something that I would do within this because I don't use Chiron in horary astrology, and I also don't use Chiron in event astrology. I think it's a stretch, and I think that there's too much stretching that occurs already in astrology for me to contribute to the over elasticity of astrology in the 21st century. However, moon Chiron is something that I'll read it to you once again from the book so that you don't think I'm making stuff up on the spot. But moon Chiron is one of the most significant combinations that I can think about in my entire life. I'm a person who doesn't really, I don't use the asteroids in astrology. And the reason for that is because I think that my astrology is fine. Astrology is content. Astrology is fine. It doesn't need the Vesta and the Juno and the next one, I think it's Pallas. The next one is called, and maybe the next one has another name, but I don't know because I don't use the asteroids. I think that astrology is completely fine. It doesn't need no asteroids. I don't think that astrology needs the black moon Lilith, the new moon Lilith, any type of Lilith, any Lilith. I'm that sort of astrologer, truthfully. And so when the Chiron thing happens in my life, it really caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting it at all. And then it happened again and again and again and again and again and again. And it happened so overwhelmingly that it was as if the universe was telling me, Michael, stop everything you're doing and pay attention to this. And I stopped and I studied the moon Chiron for years. And for years, these are the stories that people brought. Moon Chiron. This combination corresponds with severe maternal issues. The histories associated with moon Chiron are often of the following kind. The mother did not want the child, or the mother was abusive, or she often locked herself in the room and said she would commit suicide, or she actually did commit suicide, or she was on tranquilizers, or she was bipolar, or she breastfed the native siblings yet did not do the same for the native. All of these things. So if we were to change the word mother for hour, we can say that the hour did not want the person. The hour was abusive. The hour often locked herself in her room and said that she would commit atrocities. The hour actually did commit atrocities. The hour was something that needed to be tranquilized because it was knocking fucks. The hour was bipolar. The hour was able to take care of everybody else except for this specific person. We were dealing with an hour of wounding that was meant to scar us for life. or that was meant to scar this moment for life. Now, it's not a matter of scarring us for life, because I don't think that my life is going to be scarred in any way, shape, or form by the passing of Charlie Kirk. However, this hour is always going to go down in history as being the hour when this particular event occurred. And the event that occurred at this hour was an event that was truly traumatizing, because we have to remember it was also an event on a college campus. So we might look at this as this person's specific death and this very intentional killing of this person on this college campus, but it was a college campus nonetheless. And that could have been extraordinarily different, that specific moment, because it was a college campus full of students, many of whom were minors. That event could have been very different. It is a traumatic event, and it is traumatic to think that these events can still occur. And I think that it's traumatic regardless of how you feel about Charlie Kirk as a person, because many of us who travel to teach as a part of our lives, this is something that's now a part of the consideration. Is it safer for me to teach on Zoom? Is it safer for us to just write books and never show up anywhere in person? Is it safer not to show up at conferences? Is it safer just to stay my ass home? Essentially is a question that many people have to consider now. And that's not just college students, but that's also lecturers, and that's also people who, like Charlie, traveled and taught as a part of their way of making an income. So moving back into the chart, one of the final things that I do think is relevant about this chart, and truly there's a couple, but the thing I'm going to focus on is, one, in this chart, we have the sun in the conjunction with the south node, which once again, for me, isn't really that big a deal, because the sun is going to be in a conjunction with the south node once a year. And as a result of that, it's a thing that happens. And so it didn't necessarily represent the most groundbreaking thing in the world, which is why on the day when this happened, if you look at the forecast that I did for this day, for September 10th, I didn't even mention the sun in the conjunction with the south node. I did speak about on September 11th, how we had the sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Pluto on September 11th. And on that day, I did indeed speak about how on the 11th of September, we were likely to be in a state of speaking about very traumatic news, or news that completely caught us off guard, or news that completely sent us down to the underworld, essentially. And that is what happened on September 11th. But on the day before, September 10th, we had this conjunction of the sun with the south node. Whenever we have the sun in a conjunction with the south node within our natal chart, it's like that Austin Powers song of Daddy Wasn't There. Daddy wasn't there to take me to the fair, to change my underwear. It's like he didn't care. You know, it's that song, because the south node is one of the cosmic toilet bowls of the universe, and the sun is the universal significator of men in general. So we can look at sun-south node as an indication that on this day, a man is dying, or on this day, a prominent male figure within society is being flushed down the cosmic toilet bowl. However, within traditional astrology, the word Anaretic is used to refer to the final degree of a particular sign of the zodiac, otherwise known as the 30th degree. And it's called the Anaretic degree because it is a degree of utter destruction. The moon is 3 minutes of arc away from being at the Anaretic degree of Aries, which is corresponding with the terms of Saturn. The moon is very close to the Anaretic degree, because being very close to the Anaretic degree is not the same as being at the Anaretic degree. And I feel like when we start speaking in this way, where we say, oh, she's very close to it, we start to make room where anything can be said and where anything can be possible. And I think we need to tighten the ship of our astrology. However, between me, you, and Jesus, the moon is indeed very close to the Anaretic degree, because she's only 3 minutes of arc away from it. So I hope my students don't ask for a refund on their tuition when I say that I consider this to be an Anaretic moon. And even saying that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies because I would rather see that say 29 degrees Aries 0 minutes as opposed to it saying 28 degrees Aries 57 minutes. But whatever. I consider this to be an anaretic moon, and as a result of that, this is a further testament that this moment was a moment of destruction. Anyway, the anaretic degree is the final degree of every sign of the zodiac. The anaretic planet is the planet that rules the 8th house. That planet is known as the Anaretic. Anaretic. Anaretic is ancient Greek for devourer, or great hunger. And so within this chart, we have the ruler of the house of death, not only being, is he the most elevated planet? I don't know. It's contestable as to whether or not Venus is the most elevated planet or Mercury is the most elevated planet. But let's look at it. Venus is the ruler of the 12th house of hidden enemies. So if we take her as the most elevated planet, we have hidden enemies as the most elevated topic within this chart. And also we see Venus, the ruler of the house of hidden enemies, in a square relationship with the ascendant, which is saying that hidden enemies are one of the major afflictive forces at the moment of this event. And we don't only have Venus representing our hidden enemies, but we also have Venus representing our public enemies, which is saying that our hidden enemies are our public enemies and they are directly afflicting us. They are directly afflicting this moment. This is a moment in which animosity and antagonism is felt within the world at large, because this is a moment when hidden enemies become public enemies and we can see the detrimental effect that they're having at this time and at this location. Similarly, it's interesting that Venus is also ruling the 11th house, which is saying that my hidden enemies and my public enemies are people who I probably think are my friends. My hidden enemies and my public enemies are people who I probably think are my friends, and they are in us an antagonistic square relationship with the ascendant at this moment, which is fundamentally creating a level of hardship or a level of conflict or a level of challenge between me and those people here within this space. So it's a very enemy-filled or enemy-focused sort of chart, particularly with the ruler of all the enemies. Venus isn't just the ruler of one type of enemy. She is the ruler of every single type of enemy that an astrological chart can show. She is the ruler of hidden, public, and the friends who you think are your friends but aren't really your friends, and they're all squaring the ascendant. But we weren't here to talk about that. We were actually here to talk about how the Anaretic, or the great destroyer of Mercury, and why is Mercury the great destroyer? Mercury is the great destroyer because Mercury is the specific significator of death within this chart. Insofar as Mercury is ruling the 8th house of death within this chart, we have the great destroyer Mercury in a conjunction with another destructive factor within the universe, the South Node, in yet another conjunction with the Sun. Now, the Sun doesn't necessarily rule any house within this chart because, as we can see, Leo is intercepted in the 9th house, and therefore the Sun does not specifically rule any house within this chart. However, the Sun is the universal significator of men. And thus, within this chart, we see men at this exact moment, at this exact hour, at this exact place, being destroyed on all fronts, being destroyed as a result of being conjunct the South Node, being destroyed as a result of being conjunct the ruler of destruction, which is the Mercury, and being destroyed as a result of, well, if we go back to the Venus, being destroyed as a result of all the enemies present within this chart being highlighted through their afflictive aspect to the ascendant. So it's a pretty rough chart. It's a pretty rough situation, and it's a pretty rough moment indeed for all parties concerned. Now, before we leave this chart, as we must, because I do want to take us over to the Uranian astrology chart, which is really where I thought we'd be spending the majority of our time today, because I only took a cursory look at this chart initially. But as is true about astrology in general, the longer we look, the more we see. And I've seen things today that I did not see initially when I looked at this chart. I think it's also relevant that at this moment, we have the combination of Mercury in a contra-parallel relationship with Mars, because this is a combination that we also find within Charlie Kirk's birth chart. He has Mercury in a conjunction with Mars in his birth chart in the sign of Scorpio. And I spoke to you all last week about how the Mercury-Mars combination is one that specifically corresponds with somebody who has a fire on their tongue and who doesn't necessarily have the most cool or the gentlest or the kindest or the softest way of expressing themselves with others within the world at large. And I got that delineation for you from the New Western Medical Astrology, where I said that this combination is often found in the charts of people who have a fiery disposition in general. This is typically expressed in how they communicate verbally and non-verbally with others. They may speak confidently but rashly, focusing more on their right to express themselves fully rather than on how their words impact those around them. And so, not only did Charlie Kirk have this in his chart, but it was also present within the sky at the moment of his death. And while we do not see that here as a traditional astrological aspect, we do see it here as a combination by declination, which is a very important reason why we should always pay attention to combinations by declination, astrologically speaking, because combinations by declination are just as powerful as combinations that we might find within our traditional horoscope. And a lot of people are running around thinking, oh my God, why does my love life suck? There's nothing wrong happening to my Venus in my birth chart, but there might be everything wrong happening to your Venus by declination, which is a part of why we need to pay attention to these combinations as well. From a medical astrology perspective, it's also vital for us to pay attention to these combinations because Mercury-Mars is a combination. Once again, if we go and reread the New Western Medical Astrology, which I highly suggest you all do because it's a one-of-a-kind sort of book, physiologically, Mercury-Mars corresponds with overstimulation of the brain. I have often said that this combination corresponds with fire in the brain and fire on the tongue. It can be found in the charts of people who suffer from migraines and splitting headaches. It also corresponds with injuries to the head or brain, which may lead to ongoing pain in these parts of the body. This is especially likely to be the case if Mercury is in Aries and afflicted by Mars. This combination is a powerful combination that represents powerful things physiologically, and the only place we see this present within this particular chart is in the declination table. So can you imagine if me as a medical astrologer was given this chart of this person to read, a person who has splitting migraines their entire life, and that is their biggest medical concern, and if I did not speak about it, because traditionally speaking, that person's Mercury and Mars have no relationship, I would have missed out on a huge opportunity. So we must use this declination table because the declination table is a factor that is of extraordinary importance in astrology. And the fact that within this generation of astrologers, people don't use it is ridiculous. Because the information we get from the declination table is just as important, even and possibly even more so important than the information that we can get from a traditional astrological delineation alone. Now I'm going to pull up Charlie Kirk's chart on the dial because the dial provides a level of insight that is truly remarkable. And I think that we all need to just see it more and more and more and more until it just becomes the new norm. So in any mundane chart, whenever we take a look at mundane events, one of the things that we want to do is take a look at the sun, because the sun will represent the day of the event. But here we see, without even turning the dial, we see that we have Mars on this big dot. The big dot means that Mars is making some form of hard aspect with whatever the pointer is pointing at. Mars is pointing at the cardinal axis. The cardinal axis is 0 degrees of the 4 cardinal signs of Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. That is what we call the cardinal axis within Uranian astrology. Hard aspects to this cardinal axis, especially those hard aspects that we refer to as minor hard aspects, are very powerful in general. And whenever anything is in any sort of hard aspect with the cardinal axis, that thing is manifesting as having an impact in the world at large. So simply having Mars on the cardinal axis could be saying that Mars, at this exact moment and time of Charlie Kirk's assassination, Mars is being manifested in the world at large in a powerful and an extraordinary way for all the world to see. And the book, The Rules for Planetary Pictures, says Mars in the cardinal axis represents nature's forces in a general sense, but it can also represent this idea of labor, forces of nature, and injuries. So at this exact moment of this exact event, this idea of injuries was present within the zeitgeist and present within our collective consciousness, regardless of whether or not it was specifically a reference to Charlie Kirk and what was occurring for him. Now, another thing that I think is relevant is that if we pull up the Uranian astrology planets, we see that we have the combination of Zeus. This is Zeus. This is Admetos. We have Zeus, which is the lord of firearms in Uranian astrology, and Admetos, which is the lord of death. So Zeus, Admetos, when we bring them together, they represent to form, to shape, to work on, to cut, to hew, to form raw materials, to originate, to spring from. First creation, all beginnings that are difficult, tragedy, lava, fire, the interiority of the earth. When we bring them on the cardinal axis, it represents to face new problems in general, the world that is facing a new beginning or a new set of circumstances. Wonderful. When we look at what Mars means as a part of the Zeus-Admetos combination, it has to do with starting again on a work, to revolt against a hated force, to begin a new work on a small scale, to provide for more room, air, or light through energetic action. Now, whenever we're looking or reading through the rules for planetary pictures, it's important for us to know that there's going to be a grab bag of things that is attached to every planetary combination. However, if we were to do this from a more modern perspective and say that we have Zeus as the lord of firearms, Admetos as the lord of death, and Mars as a part of that combination, as he is, this could represent violent death through firearms that is being expressed through the world at large, or that is being expressed in the world at large. Here we see we have Kronos on a tiny dot in relationship to everything else. And Kronos is the planet that has to do with leaders and leaders of movements, as we must agree that Charlie Kirk was the leader of a movement. So this combination, Zeus Admetos, which could indicate death by firearms, with Mars, violent death by firearms, with Kronos, a leader, could indicate violent death by firearms of a leader within the world at large. And Kronos invariably tends to speak towards male leaders of movements. So it can be violent death of a leader within the world at large, or violent death of a male leader within the world at large, is what we can say from this combination of these stellar influences. Now, if we were to take a look at the sun and see what the sun is indicating, since the sun does indeed denote the day of the event, here we see the sun is bringing in Saturn, because Saturn is on a small dot. So this could represent a day of depression, a day of heaviness, a day of there being a general sense of sadness, or a day of there being a general sense of misfortune. If we put the pointer on the sun and drag it into the Saturn, we see that it says day for separation, day for catching the cold, the formula for rheumatism, and difficulties in everyday matters or connections. Bitter experiences, personal and bodily hindrances and difficulties, bodily difficulties through separation. So it's a day of hindrances. It's a day of bitter experiences. It's a day when something is happening that does not feel fortunate. It's a day where we might feel pursued by misfortune. Not only that, we also have Uranus here at this exact moment. And here we see that we have Uranus also in a very tight, hard aspect with the midheaven at this moment. And what this is denoting is that this moment is marked by a sudden, unexpected event. And the reason why I say that is because within mundane astrology, the midheaven denotes the word moment, and therefore Uranus midheaven could denote a sudden, unexpected event that transforms or that occurs at this moment, but also at this location. The reason why I say at this location is because the ascendant within Uranian astrology has to do with the location at which an event occurs. So this day of separation and this day of bitter experiences is happening or unfolding suddenly at this specific moment and this specific location within the world. So these are some of the combinations that we see also tied in to the Charlie Kirk assassination chart. If you put the pointer on the sun and also bring up the T and P's, what we see is that the sun is standing on the Neptune and Mythos midpoint. Neptune and Mythos is significant because Neptune and Mythos as a combination has to do with the inability to breathe. I would imagine that if anybody got shot in their neck, it would make it exceptionally difficult for them to breathe. If we look at what the book says, the rules for planetary pictures about Neptune and Mythos, it says lack of water, lack of air, deadly gas, poisons, deadly drinks, narcotics, cold air, ice or the turning to ice, decay, decline, shrinkage, to change from one aggregate to another, glaciation, freezing. But fundamentally, this idea of lack of air means that it has to do with a lack of being able to breathe in general. When we look at what the sun means as a part of that combination, it indicates Neptune and Mythos with the sun says the conditions of the body changes, weakening of the body, a person with a sedentary lifestyle, to change to a different state, freezing to death, to freeze or thaw, the man who enters into a different life, days when the weather changes. Now, one might consider the afterlife to be a different sort of life, but the reality is Neptune and Mythos means an inability to breathe, and standing with the sun, it might be indicating that the man cannot breathe at this moment. The man cannot breathe within this place. This is a moment where this man is finding a lack of air, which is resultantly weakening his body, which is what we also saw within the list of the delineations. Uranus is still a part of this because Uranus is standing with the sun. Finally, we see that a part of this combination, or on the sun axis, we also have Pluto Vulcanus. Now, Pluto means, as we know, abnormality, and Pluto also means death. Vulcanus magnifies anything that it's connected to. So here we have the abnormal magnification of death, the abnormal magnification of us speaking about death occurring on this day at this location through the sun. Let's remove the TNPs. Let's go down here to the ascendant, which we would have already looked at quite a bit. And with the ascendant, we have the Saturn being drawn into the ascendant because the Saturn is standing on this tiny dot. And we also have Uranus being drawn into the ascendant. Saturn-Uranus is the combination for separating quickly and leaving quickly, or quick leave taking. So we can say that quick leave taking is occurring at this location. And the quick leave taking of who? Charlie Kirk's own quick leave taking is occurring at this location on this day. Finally, when doing mundane astrology through Uranian astrology, we would put the pointer on the moon as a means of seeing what combinations the moon were bringing in, because if the sun represents the day of the event and the midheaven represents the moment of the event, the moon is representing the hour of the event. And finally, with the pointer on the moon, we see that the moon is standing on the Chiron-Pluto midpoint, which I don't have much to say about at all, other than the fact that Chiron is a wound and Pluto is abnormal. And the moon representing the hour could indicate that an abnormal wound is occurring within this hour. I don't know about you all, but I saw the video of what occurred, and it was truly a most remarkable and abnormal way to die. And I'm not suggesting that anyone should go and take a look at the video, but it was truly a bizarre thing to see. But it was truly an abnormal wound, if one could say so. And Pluto governs the idea of abnormality, and Chiron governs the idea of the wound. What is interesting is that there's also Poseidon here. Poseidon is the Uranian astrology planet that has to do with the spiritualization of matter, which one could say is also a death process, or turning matter into spirit. And so at this moment, we can say that matter was being turned into spirit, or the person who was passing at this moment was being translated into a spiritual state of being, i.e. death, as a result of an abnormal wound that was happening at this hour. Finally, Poseidon also corresponds with our idealism, our ideals, and our ideologies within this lifetime. So Moon Poseidon could indicate a religious moment, or rather a religious hour. It could also indicate a moment where teaching is occurring. Moon Poseidon has to do with to be a medium, the influence of the spirit upon the soul, people who are susceptible to mental and spiritual things, spiritualized beings, influence of spiritual beings and mediums. Wonderful. But what it also has to do with at a fundamental level is the idea that at this hour, there was a teaching going on. There was some philosophical discourse going on. And in the midst of that philosophical discourse going on, or this discourse that was meant to illuminate, because that's what Poseidon also means. This means that this could have been a moment where people were learning something new or hearing something new, or the intention of this moment could have been to usher people into a brand new way of thinking. That is when this abnormal wounding occurred at that exact hour of time. So, people, this is how we would look at this chart through the lens of both traditional astrology as well as through the lens of the Uranian dials. And I think at the end of this, after going through this experience with you all, because like I said, I didn't go through this independently. I just knew that people were asking us to come out with the second video. And so as a result of that, I came out with the second video. But I think that as a result of going through this experience, it just eerily shows me the ways in which all things lead back to what they're meant to lead towards. And there is no escaping the astrological influences of a moment, because just as these astrological factors have the ability to describe events that occur at these moments, these astrological factors also have the ability to describe the events that occur within our lives. And in as much as this exact time and place and location at which this event occurred was predestined from the beginning of time to hold the imprint of the event that happened at this location, at this time, and on this date, that's the same way all of our lives are built. That is the same way our lives are viewed from an astrological perspective. Every single thing we encounter within this lifetime has already been preordained since the beginning of time itself. And each and every one of us is simply here to fulfill that natal promise within this lifetime. And sometimes fulfilling that promise may feel wonderful, and other times that fulfilling that promise may feel truly crippling within our heart of hearts. But we are all here to fulfill our destiny, whatever that destiny is. And time is of the essence. So when is a better time to fulfill your destiny other than right now? If it's one thing that Charlie Kirk's death taught me, is that one, he is 1 year younger than me, which I couldn't even believe because I tend to think that I look 10 years younger in general. So I thought Charlie Kirk was in his 40s, but Charlie Kirk was 1 year younger than me. And seeing the way that he died, and once again, barring whatever my personal thoughts and opinions are about Charlie Kirk, but seeing the way that he died, this person who looked so robust, this person who looked like he was going to terrorize the hearts of young Democratic students for the next 30 years of time, this person who essentially looked like he was going to become an institution, this person who looked like he had major political goals for himself later on. Seeing how this person who was just always everywhere, all the time, doing something, saying something, going about what he thought his work was supposed to be, seeing how he was just killed, it really was an eye-opening moment for me because it made me realize that it doesn't matter how robust we look within this lifetime. This body is fallible. This body is not bulletproof. This body is not here forever. And this body will surely perish. And so that was a sign for me to make the most of my own life because I'm driving out of town today to Rhode Island. And who knows, who knows what can happen on the road? Who knows when it's my natal promise to be here no more? But I think the reality is we should all strive our best every single day, not to be lackadaisical, not to be laid back, not to procrastinate in the fulfillment of our destiny, because you are the only person on this planet who has the ability to fulfill your destiny. And if you don't do it, nobody ever will. And there's nothing worse than reaching the end of your life, feeling as if you have not accomplished what you were here to accomplish. And if you don't know what you're here to accomplish, today is as good a day as any to go out into the world and discover what your true calling in this lifetime is. So thank you so much for joining me here once again on the Oracles podcast. I love you from the bottom of my heart. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please do make sure to go out and grab yourself a copy of my latest book, The New Western Medical Astrology. It is a wonderful treasure trove of medical astrology, but as you have seen, it's a wonderful treasure trove of everything else as well. And if you have not bought the books in my series as yet, you can start with Mastering Traditional Astrology, which definitely sets you on the right path to make more sense of this book. You can find these books on Amazon. We're going to put the link down below for you so that those of you who are watching on YouTube have the ability to go and grab yourself your copies of Mastering Traditional Astrology and the New Western Medical Astrology today. Until next time, I'm your Michael A. Bryan, leaving you in peace and love and hope. Until we meet again. Have a good one. Bye-bye.